So far on this channel, we've covered true crime, one or two mysteries, and some infamous moments in the natural world. All topics that I've enjoyed delving into. However, we've not dabbled too much with alternative thinking, the paranormal, or stories that have otherworldly connections. Sure, some of the previous videos might have links to this. Check out the Devil's Teeth for some occult and possible human sacrifice threads webbed into a tragic death. Real or not, I really enjoyed this side of our world, and to investigate and discuss them with you all was one of the main drives of starting this channel. So tonight, we begin that quest in earnest, as we look back on the history of cryptozoology, as we step into the unknown. Before we get started on whens, whys and hows, I think it best to actually understand the word and field itself. Of course, we'll get into more detail later. Cryptozoology is the study of animals thought to exist which hasn't been proven or is discredited by science, and a cryptid is one of those said animals. I'm sure you can think of quite a few without much prodding. Perhaps some of them are even on screen now. Stick around to the end for a whistle-stop tour of what I am dubbing the Big Five. A person who studies in this field is known as a cryptozoologist. Like with all areas of science, or pseudoscience as this is sometimes referred to, you can even get trained and educated. There are a number of courses to study here in the UK, and probably an infinitely higher number across the Atlantic. Now we've established the simple definition and what is covered by this field of study, let's get into the founding of cryptozoology. This field of study is often attributed to Bernard Heuvelmans, a French zoologist and researcher whose book, On the Track of Unknown Animals, also delves into the origins. Despite the term entering the public consciousness in the 50s, the history of cryptozoology actually seems to date back thousands of years. In the 15th century BC, Hatshepsut was the pharaoh of Egypt. At this time, the lands of Central Africa were collectively known as Punt, a semi-mystical realm at the edge of the world. Despite this, the trade links via the Red Sea were crucial. As you can imagine, when stories of long-necked dragons and unicorns reached Hatshepsut's court, imaginations would run wild. It wasn't long before those animals would find their way to Egypt for the first time. Any guesses as to what the long-necked dragons were? I'll give you a second or two to put your answers below. If you said giraffe, you would be correct. Now, of course, you could argue this isn't cryptozoology, and is in fact just ordinary zoology. But at the time, these stories of animals or monsters were just as fanciful to the peoples of ancient Egypt as perhaps Bigfoot or the Kraken is to more modern cultures. As you should all know from the very first video of Unknown, the mystery of the pit of bones, modern humans shared the earth with other hominid species. Other species of extant humans are often regarded as cryptids in their own right. The Ramayana, written by Valmiki, sometime between the 4th and 2nd centuries BC, introduces Vanaras. These are described as highly intelligent monkey-like humanoids. Vanaras are also mentioned in other Sanskrit texts across Southeast Asia, with similar tales told in Thailand, Laos, and China. Although a lot smaller, I think the Vanaras are this region's version of Bigfoot or Yeti. Now we move into the ADs, and specifically Naturalis Historia, written by Pliny the Elder in the year 77. Following journeys across Africa and Asia, Pliny would return with fanciful tales of animals unknown to the average person of the Roman Empire at the time. Some of the animals he wrote about are giant grasshoppers with saw-like arms, dog-headed humanoids, man-cats from Africa, fire-breathing basilisks, and an untold number of insects such as killing flies. Let me know in the comments on your guesses as to whatever any of those are. In the 1550s, Swiss naturalist Conrad Gesner published Historiae Animalium, which documented all known animals at the time. You had best believe some cryptids snuck into the 5-volume piece, which is often cited as the start of modern zoology. Many of these are even well known in the modern day. Unicorns, hellcats, sea monsters, sky serpents and dragons, mermaids, and the Kraken. The first scientific mention of Bigfoot occurred in 1811 as David Thompson was mapping regions of Canada. He heard stories from the local Spokane tribe which told of giants that lived in the mountains to the west. These giants would steal salmon and even people in night raids. A few decades later came the Great Sea Serpent by Antoine Cornelis Oudemans, which is often thought of as the scholarly origin of cryptozoology. Which brings us back to Bernard Heuvelmans. Bernard believed in scientific rigour and an interdisciplinary approach, taking particular attention in the tales, legends and folklore of local cultures and trying to ascertain the possible elements of truth within them in an attempt to find and document the animals or monsters. As we'll discover later, sometimes these stories are actually founded on truth. Scottish explorer and biologist Ivan Sanderson is a name mentioned in the previous episode, the Serpent of Katanga. I think Sanderson and Heuvelmans might get a video of their own to go through their careers and writings in more depth, but I'll touch upon Sanderson briefly here. Alongside Bernard, he is attributed as one of the modern fathers of cryptozoology, and even the man who came up with the name for the field. After publishing many works on the natural world from tours of West Africa and the Caribbean, he would move into the field of cryptozoology in the 40s. It seemed he had a particular interest in sea monsters and extant dinosaurs, as well as an infamous run-in with giant penguins in Florida. He would release a book entitled Abominable Snowmen, wherein he argued that there were actually 4 species or types of Yeti spread across 5 continents. Unfortunately, this book, as well as Heuvelmans, were not well received by critics or science. Other well-known names in the field to bring us to the present are Loren Coleman, Carl Schucker, and Willie Ley. Perhaps even the next big name in cryptozoology is watching now, being inspired by my dulcet tones, so be sure to remember me when you're counting your millions after finding Bigfoot. As I mentioned earlier, cryptozoology is mainly viewed as pseudoscience. This basically means that fields such as this are often marginalised or ignored by the mainstream scientific community. I am far from educated enough or knowledgeable in these sorts of topics to be able to truly say one way or the other. It's not just in the realms of biology or zoology. Alternative history and archaeology, championed by people such as Graham Hancock, are also under fire from the mainstream. I'm not wanting to get dragged into the raging internet debates and arguments on this sort of topic, but I will part with some of my thinking. It's easy to say that those early zoologists, or perhaps cryptozoologists, we went through earlier were simply doing zoology. It just so happened to be that the animals they were recording for the first time for their cultures are known to modern science. I can see why it can be so difficult for us to look back on these times with that modern lens. I do it too. We know that giraffes have been around for a very long time, and we know that they were the long-necked dragons the ancient Egyptians heard stories about. To those people, they were stories brought back from a nearly mystical land far away at the edge of their known world, and far from believable. Perhaps it is the more modern conception of cryptozoology that has diluted this field of science. Similar to the fields investigating the paranormal, it's the advent of mainstream media worth millions, or the ease of which a hoax can go viral and be believed, which, in turn, mars the respective field. Now, I love those sorts of programs as much as the next person. How can you not enjoy a group of friends stumbling around in the dark of Appalachia? But perhaps they do detract away from the good work that others in the cryptozoology field are doing. And maybe it's also the hundreds of cryptids that have entered the zeitgeist that are a lot more fanciful and less grounded in realistic biology, which doesn't help. Though you can bet we'll be looking at them all at some point, so crack out the tinfoil. I think so long as expeditions are conducted as close to what would be expected of other scientific expeditions, bearing in mind they cost thousands of pounds and just as much in man hours, or perhaps even with the help and guidance of the more mainstream academic world. I'll get off my soapbox now. I'm sure you didn't start watching this video to listen to me prattle on any more than I usually do. Are there any examples of when cryptozoology was proved correct? There definitely is. I must preface this with the fact that many of these animals were dismissed as fanciful stories by Western science and viewpoints. No different, I'd wager, from an Egyptian waving away word of giraffes from Punt until one came walking past them. The best example I can give you is this. An egg-laying mammal with a duck's bill and venomous spurs on its legs. Even the description of a platypus makes it sound like something from a fantasy novel, let alone seeing one. I can understand why people not familiar would dismiss these stories, and even dismiss it once they saw a specimen. It was believed to be an elaborate hoax at first, though, eventually, these curious creatures from Australia would be described by Western science. How about unicorns that inhabit the dense Vietnamese jungles? Until 1992, these animals were just as believable as their European mythic counterparts. Again, the local people knew of the Sowler's existence long before Western science described it. The keen-eyed among you will notice that it has 2 horns and not 1, so how could it have been described as a unicorn? Well, its horns are so symmetrical with one another that when seen from the side, it only appears as 1 horn. Finally, the Kraken of Norse myth and legend, a monstrous cephalopod that attacked ships and plucked sailors from decks with long arms and tentacles. Perhaps at times there might even be evidence of attacks on ships throughout history, or even healed wounds on whales that gave a hint of a prowling creature of the deep. Cue the discovery of the giant and colossal squid. Now, as promised earlier, here come the big 5. Feel free to debate these in the comments, but these are the 5 I saw repeated the most often. If your favourite hasn't made the list, I apologise. Make sure to educate me. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, Abominable Snowman. The hairy man of the wilds goes by many names across the world and, along with our next mention, is probably the most iconic cryptid. Loch Ness Monster. A relic from a bygone prehistoric time, dwelling in a large Scottish body of water, probably has one of the most famous images of any cryptid. An honourable mention as well for its cousin, living in Lake Champlain. Perhaps bordering more on the supernatural with this one, but I've seen Mothman getting a lot of love online. A herald of doom, or a warning of imminent disaster. I guess we'll uncover that when we head off to Point Pleasant. Who doesn't love dinosaurs? And who wouldn't love a remnant population of sauropods in the depths of the Congolese jungle? Step forward, Macaulay and Bembe. Maybe this one is even prey for the giant serpent of Katanga. And finally, a worm as big as a man that can spit acid and blast you with electricity. The Mongolian deathworm is a worthy inclusion on this list. So there we have it, a history of cryptozoology through the ages. And there's certainly more to come as unknown rumbles on. If you want to stay up to date and not miss what comes out next, make sure to subscribe. And, of course, all the other YouTube things. Let me know what you would like to be covered the next time we step into the unknown.